Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if who we are is just a fixed thing, or if the way we see ourselves and others changes depending on where and when we live? That is the super interesting question. A team of researchers asked. They looked at ancient Roman writings to see how people described each other and found something really surprising about personality. Basically, we think of personality as a set of traits that are pretty much the same for everyone, everywhere. All the time. Think of the big 5 personality traits like openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These are the categories most psychologists use today. But what if these categories are not actually universal? What if they're just what we in the modern world, especially in the West, have decided personality looks like? The researchers decided to go way back in time to an era when the Roman Empire was changing a lot. Imagine a world that was once very connected and orderly, then went through a lot of instability and upheaval. During this time, a new religion, Christianity, started to spread and eventually became very powerful, influencing everything from how people thought about themselves to how they interacted with each other. This change from a more pagan way of life to a Christian one is key to the story. So how do you study personality from thousands of years ago? The scientists used ancient texts. They gathered a huge collection of writings from Roman times between 88 BCE and 800 CE. This included letters, biographies, histories, and religious texts. Think of it like digging through an ancient social media feed, but way more formal. They collected over 8,000 documents, which is about 15.7 million words. They carefully categorized each text as either coming from a pagan author or a Christian author. This distinction was super important because they wanted to see if the way people describe personality changed depending on their religious beliefs. Now, for the cool part, they used fancy computer programs called large language models to go through all these texts and pull out words that describe people's personalities. Think of them as digital detectives scanning for adjectives used to describe individuals. They focused on finding words that described stable personality traits. Not just what someone looked like or how they were feeling in a particular moment. They ended up with 12,445 personality descriptive adjectives. Of course, names can be tricky. People were called by different names, titles, or nicknames. So they had another computer program help sort out who is who, making sure they were describing the same person when they saw different references to them. This was important to get a clear picture of how individuals were perceived. To make sure their computer detective work was accurate, they also had humans check a lot of the results. This is like a double-checking process to ensure the computer didn't make too many mistakes. They found the computer was pretty good, but humans helped fine-tune it. After extracting all these descriptive words, they used a statistical method called latent Dirichlet allocation, or LDA. Don't worry too much about the name. Think of LDA as a tool that looks for patterns in a huge pile of words and groups words that tend to show up together when describing people. It is like finding themes in a big collection of essays, in this case. Each person described in the text became like a mini document, and the personality words they were called were the terms. The LDA then groups these terms into topics, which can be thought of as underlying personality dimension. And here is where the big discovery happened. When they analyzed the texts from pagan Romans, they found 5 main groups, or topics, of personality traits. These were mainly about fortitude, like being brave or wise, justice, like being fair and kind, severity, like being stern or harsh, loyalty, like being faithful and devoted, and vice like being weak or evil. So pagan personality seemed to be structured around these 5 main ideas. But then they looked at the Christian texts, and what they found was quite different. Christian personality descriptions collapsed into just 3 main topics: humility like being meek and righteous, sanctity like being holy and pious, and asceticism like being disciplined and devoted to religious practice. This is a huge difference. The authors suggest that the Christian worldview, with its emphasis on religious virtues, saints, and a relationship with God, naturally led to a different way of categorizing people's personalities compared to the more civic and martial values often highlighted in pagan Roman society. Even when pagan and Christian authors described the same people, the Christian authors tended to use a tighter group of moral and religious terms. They specifically looked at words that were used much more often by one group than the other. For example, words like holy, pious, and devout were strongly associated with Christian authors. On the other hand, words like stern, brave, valiant, and cruel were more common in pagan writings. This shows that the language used to describe personality really depended on the cultural and religious context. What is really compelling is that they found instances where both pagan and Christian authors described the same individuals. When they compared these descriptions, they saw that even for the same person, the pagan authors might use terms like valiant and stern, while Christian authors would use faithful and gracious. This really highlights that the descriptions were influenced not just by the person being described, but by the perspective of the person doing the describing. This research suggests that personality isn't some fixed universal blueprint inside us. Instead, our understanding and description of personality are shaped by our social environment, our institutions, and the prevailing cultural values. As the Roman world transitioned from paganism to Christianity, the very way people understood and categorized human character changed. It is fascinating because we tend to think of personality models like the Big Five as universal truths. But this study shows that even these modern models might be a product of our specific time and culture, not an inherent structure of the human mind. The study didn't find the Big Five in Roman texts, nor did it find earlier systems like the humoral temperaments that Romans themselves discussed. This leads the researchers to a really important point. They suggest that what they've recovered might not be a perfect map of how Romans actually were, but rather a map of how Romans talked about people. It is about the language and the structure of that language used to make sense of others. This practice of describing people, they argue, is sensitive to cultural niches and not necessarily fixed cognitive structures. Now, like any science, this study has its limitations. They use translated texts, which can sometimes lose subtle meanings. Also, these texts often come from elites, so they might not fully represent how everyone in Roman society described each other. And there is always the chance that the texts that survived are not a perfectly random sample of all Roman communications. The key takeaway is that personality isn't just a scientific concept. It is deeply intertwined with culture, history, and beliefs. The way we describe ourselves and others evolves. The pagan and Christian Romans carved up the space of personality in different ways because their social worlds, their institutions, and their values were different. This research opens up a whole new way to think about personality, not as something static, but as something dynamic and shaped by the worlds we inhabit. It makes you wonder what personality structures might emerge in entirely different cultures, or in the future, shaped by our own evolving social ecologies. What do you think about this idea that personality descriptions change so much across cultures and time? Does it change how you think about your own personality or how you view others? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more fascinating science explained simply. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.